The day my husband drove to the train station to collect his mother and sister, bags, boxes, and permanent relocation plans fully loaded, he told them I was a pushover who would cry, complain, and then fold. He wasn't going to ask me. He was simply going to walk through my front door and announce it as fact. What he didn't know was that while he sat in that parking lot waiting for the 11:45 from Millbrook, I was standing in my own kitchen, listening to a locksmith whistle quietly as he fitted a brand new deadbolt into my front door. And when Daniel finally pushed that door open, Brenda just behind him, Kayla dragging a rolling suitcase the size of a small coffin, the first thing he saw was a stocky man in gray overalls crouched at the threshold, tightening the last screw with a calm, unhurried hand. Daniel stumbled half a step backward. He turned to his mother with something that looked very much like panic and said, "Mom, there's some guy in here." I was standing 10 feet away with a cup of tea I wasn't drinking and a business card I had already memorized. I looked at my husband across the length of the hallway we had once painted together on a long Sunday afternoon. I in an old college t-shirt, he with a streak of cream paint across his cheek that I had kissed off. And I said very quietly, "That's Gary. He just finished changing the locks. You can tip him on your way out, Daniel. All three of you." I should tell you what this house means to me before I tell you how I almost lost it. My grandmother, Eleanora Hayes, bought the property in 1971 with money she had saved over 11 years of nursing work. Double shifts, night rotations, weekends that blurred into weekdays. And she paid cash. She was proud of that. She used to tell me the story every summer when I came to stay with her, sitting on the back porch with our hands wrapped around mugs of chamomile tea, the garden tumbling its way down toward the back fence in a gorgeous, untidy riot of lavender and climbing roses. She would say, "Claire, nobody can take a thing from you that's in your own name." She tapped the porch railing with her knuckle when she said it, like she was knocking on something solid and permanent. I was 8 the first time I heard it. I was 26 when I inherited the house. She left it to me outright in her will, and I mean outright. No strings, no shared ownership, no conditions. The deed was transferred into my name 6 weeks after her funeral, and I remember sitting in the property attorney's office with my eyes still raw from crying and thinking, this is what she was protecting all those years. Not the building itself. The house was old and needed work, and the plumbing was an adventure. But the principle of it, the thing that was hers, the thing that nobody could reach. I spent the first 2 years pouring every spare dollar I had into restoring it. I refinished the floors myself, tile by painstaking tile in the bathroom, pulled up the carpeting in the hallway to find the original hardwood underneath, planted a proper herb garden along the south-facing fence. I was a project manager by profession and a perfectionist by temperament, and I treated that house like the most important project I had ever taken on. By the time I met Daniel, the house on Cartwright Lane was everything I had always imagined a home should be. Warm in winter, bright in summer, smelling of old wood and fresh paint, and the basil that grew in a fat terracotta pot on the kitchen windowsill. I met Daniel Whitmore at a mutual friend's housewarming party 3 years ago. He was funny, easy with people in a way that I admired, and he had this quality of genuine attentiveness that I hadn't encountered in a long time. He actually listened when you talked, turned toward you, asked follow-up questions. I fell for him in the specific, incremental way you fall for someone when you're old enough to do it carefully. Slowly at first, then with a wholehearted conviction that surprised me. We dated for 14 months and got married in a small ceremony in October, exactly 2 falls ago. I remember the light that afternoon, the way it came through the maple trees at the back of the garden and turned everything amber and gold. And I thought, this is it. This is the good part. Daniel moved into the house on Cartwright Lane because I had always lived there, and it made sense. And because, quite frankly, the house was beautiful, and his apartment had been a place he was always about to move out of. We didn't have a prenuptial agreement. I know. My father had suggested it, gently at dinner one evening before the wedding, and I had waved the idea away with the breezy certainty of someone who has never had to fight for anything. "We trust each other, Dad," I had said. He looked at me for a moment and then nodded and changed the subject. But the look had stayed with me in the way that certain things stay with you. Not understood yet, just filed away. Brenda Whitmore, my mother-in-law, lived 4 hours away in Millbrook with Daniel's younger sister Kayla, 23 years old and still figuring out what she wanted to do with her life. I had met Brenda perhaps 15 or 20 times in total, at the wedding, at Christmas, at the occasional family gathering that Daniel drove me to, with the particular tense cheerfulness of a man who was already managing expectations. She was a small woman in her early 60s, carefully put together, with a habit of turning any conversation about you into a conversation about herself within 4 or 5 exchanges. Not aggressively, smoothly, as if it happened naturally, as if she couldn't help it. She called me honey in a way that always sounded slightly like a correction. I had noticed things in a mild and easily dismissible way. The way she touched every surface in my house when she visited, picking things up and setting them down with a proprietary little pause. The way she said, "Daniel's house," once, then caught herself and said, "your house," without acknowledging the slip. The way she asked about our finances with the particular careful interest of someone compiling information rather than making conversation. But I had chalked it up to personality, to the specific anxieties of a woman whose son had married and moved away and whose grip on his life had consequently loosened. I was patient with her. I was careful. I was, as it would turn out, exactly the kind of careful that sees the knife being sharpened but doesn't believe anyone would actually use it. The first real warning came 4 months before Gary the locksmith appeared in my hallway. We were at Brenda's for a long Thanksgiving weekend, and I was helping her in the kitchen on Thursday evening while Daniel and Kayla watched football in the next room. Brenda was stirring gravy and I was setting the table, and she said, without looking up from the pot, That house of yours must be a real burden to maintain alone," she said, her voice carrying that particular inflection of sympathetic concern that she deployed the way a surgeon deploys a scalpel, precisely, without waste. All those old systems, the plumbing, the roof. Daniel mentioned the roof needed work. Daniel had mentioned it to me once, in passing, 2 weeks earlier. The fact that the information had traveled to Millbrook and been filed away and was now being retrieved over a pot of gravy told me something I wasn't ready to name yet. "I manage," I said, and set a fork down with more care than was strictly necessary. "Of course you do, honey." She tasted the gravy and reached for the salt. "I just think, a house like that, it's so much for one person. Even with Daniel, really. It's a lot of square footage for 2 people, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. She phrased it as a fact she was generously allowing me to agree with. "Kayla and I rattle around in this little place, and you have all that room just sitting there." I said something non-committal and moved back to the table, and Brenda returned to her gravy, and the conversation dissolved the way those conversations do, into the noise of the game from the living room, the smell of roasting turkey, the ordinary sounds of a family holiday. But later that night, lying in the guest room while Daniel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the way she had said it. All that room just sitting there, as if the house were waiting, as if it were already hers in some theoretical space she was slowly making real. I mentioned it to Daniel in the car on the drive home Sunday. I kept my voice light, almost amused, because I was still in the phase where I was more interested in being reasonable than in being right. I said, "Your mom made a comment about the house having too much space, about her and Kayla rattling around in Millbrook." Daniel was quiet for a moment, that specific, weighted quality of quiet that isn't the absence of thought, but the management of it. Then he said, "She's just lonely, Claire. She doesn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said. "I'm just mentioning it. She's had a hard year. The thing with her knee, and the neighbors sold, and new people moved in that she doesn't get along with, and Kayla's not working right now. Daniel, I'm not criticizing her. I'm just telling you what she said. I know, he said. And then, after another pause, I know. We didn't talk about it again. I filed it in the same drawer where I kept the look my father had given me at the prenuptial conversation. And I went back to my life, the project at work that was consuming 12 hours a day, the herb garden that needed cutting back before winter, the house on Cartwright Lane that was mine and that I loved and that I had never, not once, considered the possibility of losing. The second warning came 6 weeks later and was delivered, of all places, through my own husband's phone. I wasn't snooping. I want to be precise about that because it matters to me, even now. I was not the kind of wife who checked her husband's messages. His phone had been charging on the kitchen counter when mine died, and he had told me to use it to look up the Thai place's delivery number. And the screen was already unlocked when I picked it up, and the message thread that was open, already visible, not something I went looking for, was between Daniel and his mother. The timestamp on the last message was 11:17 that morning, while I had been in a meeting at work. Brenda had written, "Did you talk to her yet about the arrangement?" Daniel had written back, "Not yet. I need to find the right time. She's going to make it difficult." Brenda, "She'll come around. She always does. You know how to handle her." Daniel, "I know. Just give me a little more time." I stood in my kitchen for what felt like a very long time. The basil on the windowsill was catching the late afternoon light, making long, thin shadows across the counter. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on Cartwright Lane, with its radio playing something I couldn't quite identify. I put Daniel's phone down on the counter very carefully, as if it were fragile, as if the wrong movement might shatter something. Then I picked up my own charger, plugged in my dead phone, and stood there watching the charging screen come to life. And I thought, the arrangement. I thought, she always does. I thought, you know how to handle her. And then I thought about my grandmother on the back porch, knocking on the railing with her knuckle, and I felt something shift inside me. Not break, not crack, but shift, the way tectonic things shift, slow and irrevocable and eventually enormous. When Daniel came home that evening, I watched him the way you watch something you are recalibrating your understanding of. He was warm, easy, kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, poured himself a glass of water. He was exactly himself, or rather, he was exactly the version of himself that I had been permitted to see. And I smiled and answered his questions and asked about his day in return. And behind my smile, I was very quietly beginning to think. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to understand the full shape of the thing before I touched it. This was how I worked on difficult projects at the office. You don't start pulling at threads until you know which ones are load-bearing. You gather. You assess. You wait for the complete picture. The complete picture arrived on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later, in the form of a conversation I was never meant to hear. Daniel had taken a call in the backyard. I had been upstairs in the small room I used as a home office, working late, and I had come down to get a glass of water and heard his voice through the kitchen window, the window that looked out onto the back porch, the window I always left slightly cracked because I liked the night air when I worked. He wasn't shouting. He was speaking in the quiet, confidential tone of someone who believed he was alone. "I told you, Mom, she's not going to be a problem. I'll just tell her. She'll cry and complain, and then she'll accept it. She always does. I know Claire. She talks a lot, but she backs down. She's a pushover." I stood at the kitchen sink with my hand on the cold tap, and I did not move. Kayla's room can be the back bedroom, yeah, the one with the good light. Claire uses it as an office, but she can move that stuff into the living room. A pause. He was listening to something Brenda was saying. "No, I'm not going to ask her permission, Mom. It's my house, too. Half of everything is mine now that we're married. My lawyer said, yeah, he said in a common law property state it's—" Another pause, longer. Right, that's what I figured. So we established the pattern of living, and then if it ever became a legal situation, I turned the cold tap on very slowly so it made no sound, filled my glass, drank it standing at the sink, and walked back upstairs to my office. I sat down in my chair. I looked at the walls of the room that I had painted sage green 3 summers ago, the bookshelves I had built myself from reclaimed wood, the desk that had been my grandmother's and that I had refinished with my own hands. The room smelled of old books and wood polish and the faint drift of night-blooming jasmine from the garden below. I sat very still, and I let the full weight of what I had just heard settle into me. She's a pushover. It's my house, too, if it ever became a legal situation. His lawyer. Daniel had been talking to a lawyer. Not our lawyer, a lawyer. His lawyer. I thought about my father's careful face at dinner before the wedding. I thought about the prenuptial agreement I had waved away with the breezy certainty of someone who trusted. I thought about Brenda saying all that room just sitting there over her pot of gravy, with that smooth, patient quality, as if she were describing something already decided. And then I picked up my phone and called my father. He answered on the second ring. He always answered on the second ring. I don't know why that small, consistent fact made my eyes fill with tears right then, but it did. The reliability of it. The simple proof that some people in your life do exactly what you expect them to do. "Dad," I said, "I need Marcus's number." Marcus Webb was my father's college roommate and the best property attorney in the city, and my father had been quietly trying to give me his number since before my wedding day. "And I need you to not ask me any questions tonight. Just give me the number." There was a pause. Then my father said, "I'll text it to you right now." And because he was my father and he knew me, he added only, "Are you all right?" "I will be," I said. And I meant it. Not in the fragile, hopeful way you say things you aren't sure of. I meant it the way you mean something when you have already decided it. I called Marcus Webb the next morning from my car in the parking garage at work, before I went in. He was thorough, patient, and direct in the way that truly good lawyers are. No wasted reassurance, no theatrical alarm, just clear information delivered cleanly. He asked me questions and I answered them, and at the end of 20 minutes he said, "The good news is that the house was deeded solely to you before the marriage, and you have not co-signed any document adding Daniel to the title. That matters. That matters enormously. In this state, separate property that was yours before marriage and has not been commingled, meaning you haven't used marital funds to pay the mortgage or make improvements in a way that could establish joint interest, remains yours." He paused. "Have you made any joint account withdrawals for the house?" I thought about it carefully. The renovation 2 years ago I paid from my personal account. The roof, last year, I used our joint account for half. Daniel contributed some, maybe $8,000? Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's a potential argument for partial marital interest. Not devastating, but worth being aware of. Document everything. Keep every receipt, every bank statement. And Claire, don't let anyone move into that house without your explicit written consent. Occupancy establishes precedent. If his mother and sister establish residence, they won't," I said. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way." I drove to work and sat through 3 meetings and reviewed a project timeline and responded to 17 emails and did all of it on the surface of myself, while underneath, in the cold, quiet place that had opened up in me that evening at the kitchen sink, I was building a plan. I didn't tell Daniel what I knew. I watched him carefully over the next 2 weeks, watched him be normal, be warm, come home at regular times, help with dinner, tell funny stories about his colleagues, touch my shoulder in passing the way he always had. And I kept thinking, "I know you," which had been his phrase, his certainty about me. I know Claire. She talks a lot, but she backs down. And I thought, no, Daniel. You know the version of me that I allowed you to see, because I loved you and I trusted you, and I was not yet afraid. You have never met the other one. I began to prepare. I opened a personal account at a different bank, not the joint one, a separate one, mine alone, and redirected my direct deposit there. I photographed every document in the house that was relevant: the deed, the original inheritance paperwork, the title, my grandmother's will, every receipt for every improvement I had made to the property in the past 6 years. I organized them into a digital folder that I backed up in 3 separate places and emailed to Marcus in a compressed file he confirmed receiving. I called a locksmith, Gary, who came recommended by a colleague and who had a calm, unhurried manner that I found deeply reassuring, and scheduled him for the following Tuesday between 1 and 3 p.m. I also, quietly and without fanfare, began talking to my neighbor Ruth, who was 68 years old and had lived on Cartwright Lane longer than anyone, and who had known my grandmother. I told Ruth what was happening in broad strokes and asked if she would be willing to provide a witness statement, if it ever became necessary, regarding the history of the property and my sole occupancy and management of it. Ruth said, "Honey, I watched your grandmother plant those roses. You just tell me where to sign." I was ready on a Tuesday. Daniel had told me, casually, as if it were already arranged, which I now understood it was, that his mother and sister were coming for an extended visit. He used those words, extended visit. He said it over breakfast on Sunday morning, not looking at me, pouring his coffee with a small performance of normalcy. Mom and Kayla are thinking of coming down, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, for a while. How long is a while? I asked. He shrugged in that maddening way. They need a change of scene. Millbrook's been rough for them. Kayla needs a fresh start, and Mom's knee is... Daniel, I kept my voice even. How long? He looked at me then, and for a half second I saw something pass across his face, something that might have been shame if it had been allowed to fully form, but that he smoothed over before it could. Indefinitely, he said. For now. I see, I said, and I picked up my coffee cup and went to water the basil on the windowsill, and Daniel sat at the table and watched me and said nothing else, and the silence between us was dense with everything neither of us was saying yet. Tuesday, 1:45 p.m. Gary arrived with his kit and his quiet competence, and I made tea and watched him work, and at 2:15 he handed me 2 new keys on a plain metal ring, and I signed his invoice and thanked him. He asked if I needed him to wait, and I said no, I had it handled, and he nodded and packed up his tools and left through the back gate. I stood in my hallway with the 2 new keys in my hand. At 3:20, I heard Daniel's car in the driveway, the sound of the car door, then 2 more car doors, the scrape of luggage on asphalt, voices, Brenda's high, carrying one, Kayla's lower murmur, Daniel's particular tone of forced cheerfulness, the one I now recognized as the sound of a man performing confidence he doesn't fully feel. Footsteps on the front path, the sound of Daniel's key in the old lock, trying it, then trying it again, then the slight change in his breathing that I could hear even through the door, that small, confused silence. He knocked. I opened the door. There was Gary, or rather, there was Gary's absence, the fresh brass of the new lock, the faint smell of machine oil that hadn't quite dissipated. And there was Daniel, with Brenda just behind his left shoulder and Kayla behind her, surrounded by luggage, 2 large rolling cases, a duffel, a box with a kitchen appliance visible through the flap. And there was my husband's face, caught between the expression it had been holding and the one it was trying to find. "Mom," he said, looking at the lock, at the door, at Gary's retreating van, at me. "There's some guy in here." "There was some guy in here," I said. "He just left. He changed the locks." I stepped back from the door, not opening it wider, not inviting anyone in, just stepping back into my hallway, holding my cup of tea with both hands. "You can come in, Daniel. Just you." Brenda made a sound, a short, shocked intake of breath that she converted almost instantly into a different expression, something softer and more wounded, which I recognized as her primary instrument. She said, "Claire, honey, we've been traveling all day." "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry about the travel. But you won't be staying here, Brenda." "I'll explain that to Daniel inside, and he can explain it to you." I looked at my husband. "Daniel, please come in." The moment had a quality that I hadn't expected. Not the hot, chaotic quality of a confrontation I had imagined, but something colder and stiller, like the moment before weather. Daniel stood on my front step with his family's luggage arranged around him and looked at me, and I looked back at him, and I think he understood in that moment that the version of me he had been discussing with his mother, the pushover, the crier, the woman who talks a lot but backs down, was not the woman standing in front of him. He came inside. I closed the door. We stood in the hallway we had painted together that Sunday, cream-colored walls, the original hardwood gleaming, the framed photograph of my grandmother's garden on the wall beside the coat hooks, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see the shapes of Brenda and Kayla on the other side, close together, not moving. "Claire," Daniel started. "I know about the conversations with your mother," I said. "I know about the arrangement. I know about the lawyer you consulted. I know that you decided to handle me rather than talk to me." I watched each of those land on his face, one after the other. "I know all of it, Daniel. I've known for 3 weeks." He opened his mouth and closed it. The particular articulate ease that I had always admired in him, the thing that made him good at his job, good at parties, good at making people feel heard, was completely gone. He looked, for the first time since I had known him, like a man who had run out of words. "I want to be very clear about one thing," I continued, in the same quiet, level tone. I had practiced this in my head many times, and the practice had done what practice does. Stripped the emotion away from the delivery, left only the information. This house belongs to me, not to us. To me, solely, in my name, as it has been since my grandmother left it to me 6 years ago. I have spoken to a property attorney, and I am completely clear on what is mine and what is not. Your mother and your sister will not be moving in. Not today, not next month, not ever. If you feel that decision is incompatible with this marriage, that is a conversation we will have, with a mediator or an attorney or both. But it is not a conversation we will have on your timeline, with your family on my doorstep. Daniel said, "I know what you wanted," I said. "You wanted to present it as a fait accompli, because you believed I would accept it once it was already in motion." Your words, Daniel, not mine. She'll cry and complain, and then she'll accept it. The color left his face so quickly and so completely that it was like watching a light switch off. He stared at me. "You heard that." I heard that. The silence was enormous. Outside, through the frosted glass, one of the shapes, Brenda's, I thought, by the posture, moved slightly, shifted weight from one foot to the other. A car passed on Cartwright Lane. Somewhere in the house, the old pipes made a sound they sometimes made in the late afternoon, a low, metallic tick. "She's my mother," Daniel said, finally. It was the thing he always said. It was, I realized, the thing he would always say. The 4 words that explained and excused everything, that had functioned for his entire life as a reason and a shield and a get-out clause all at once. "I know she is," I said, "and she can remain your mother from Millbrook or from wherever else she chooses to live. She cannot live here." I set my teacup down on the hall table. "I'm going to go upstairs now. When you're ready to have a real conversation, a conversation between 2 adults, without her on the phone, without whatever plan you've been working on, I'm here. But I need you to go out there and tell them they need to find a hotel." "Claire, they don't have—" "That is not my problem to solve," I said, and I went upstairs. I sat in my grandmother's chair, at my grandmother's desk, in the sage-green room that smelled of old books and jasmine, and I listened to the muffled sounds of Daniel on the front step, the low urgency of his voice, Brenda's sharper one cutting across it, Kayla's silence. I heard the scrape of luggage on the path. I heard a car door, and then another. I heard Daniel's voice doing the thing it did when he was managing his mother, that specific, careful cadence. And then I heard his key in the new lock, which of course didn't work, and then I heard him knock. I went downstairs and let him in and locked the door behind him. He stood in the hallway and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not quite remorse, not quite anger, something exhausted and uncertain in the middle. He said, "Where am I supposed to tell them to go?" "There's a Marriott Courtyard on 15th, I said. I looked it up. They have availability. I had, in fact, looked it up and confirmed availability that morning. I'll pay for 3 nights. After that, they'll need to make their own arrangements. He stared at me. "You looked it up?" "Yes." "How long have you been planning this?" 3 weeks, I said. "Since the night I heard you tell your mother I was a pushover." He closed his eyes, opened them. "I didn't mean, Daniel." My voice was very quiet. It was the quietest I had ever been in a confrontation in my life, and I think that quietness scared him more than shouting would have. "Don't tell me what you didn't mean. Tell me what you did mean. Tell me when you consulted a lawyer without telling me. Tell me what the arrangement was. Tell me all of it. Because I am not going to pretend I didn't hear what I heard, and I am not going to make this easy for you by accepting a partial explanation." He sat down on the bottom stair. Just sat down, right there in the hallway, like his legs had made the decision independently. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and for a long moment, that was the only sound in the house, his breathing and the tick of the pipes, and outside, faintly, the sound of his mother's rental car pulling away from the curb. He told me everything. It came out in pieces, halting and ashamed, and I sat on the bench at the foot of the stairs and listened without interrupting. Brenda had been planning the move for months, since Christmas, in fact. Her knee made the stairs at the Millbrook house difficult. Kayla had lost her job in November and hadn't found another one. The plan had been Brenda's first, presented to Daniel as a question. What if we all lived together? And then, gradually, as the months passed, as Daniel's responses had not been immediately, firmly negative, as the question had transformed into an assumption, into logistics, into conversations about which room would be Kayla's, the plan had simply become real in his mother's mind. And Daniel, who had never in his life found a way to refuse his mother anything, had not found a way to refuse this either. Instead, he had begun to believe, or to convince himself, that it was manageable, that I would accept it, that he could explain it to me after the fact in a way that would make it seem reasonable. The lawyer had been Brenda's suggestion. She had told Daniel that because we had no prenuptial agreement and had been using joint funds for some house maintenance, he might have a legitimate interest in the property, that if Claire made a fuss, as Brenda had apparently phrased it, he would have legal standing. Daniel had consulted a lawyer once, briefly, over the phone. The lawyer had given him a more complicated answer than Brenda's confident summary, but Daniel had told his mother what she wanted to hear, which was the habit of a lifetime. "She told me you'd come around," he said, still with his face partly turned away, still with that quality of shame that had not yet decided whether it was going to become accountability or self-pity. "She said you always back down when it comes to family stuff." "She doesn't know me," I said. "No," he said, "she doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought I did." "You knew the version of me that was trying to keep the peace," I said. "You should know by now, I'm not doing that anymore." We talked for 3 hours. It was not a gentle conversation, and it was not a resolved one. There were no easy endings that evening, no warm reconciliations, no simple forgiveness. I told him clearly that his mother and sister would not live in this house under any circumstances, that I would not negotiate on that point, and that if he needed to choose between his marriage and his mother's plans, he needed to understand that I was not offering him a soft version of that choice. I told him that the lawyer consultation, secret, strategic, aimed at finding leverage over me in my own home, was a betrayal of a kind that I did not know how to simply set aside. I told him that I would need time, and that I would need honesty, and that I would need, for the first time in our marriage, to see him make an unambiguous, public choice. He called his mother that night. I didn't ask to listen. I stayed in the kitchen with the lights on and the radio playing something low, and I heard him in the next room, the long, difficult sound of a man finally saying no to the person he had never said it to. It was not clean. Brenda cried. I heard that, too. She told him he was abandoning her, that Claire had poisoned him against his own family, that after everything she had sacrificed, he was choosing a woman he'd known 3 years over his own mother. I heard him say, "Mom, no, this isn't about choosing. This is about what's right." I heard him say it twice, the second time with more conviction than the first. He came into the kitchen afterward and sat at the table and looked at me and didn't say anything for a moment. His eyes were red. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than the evening. "I should have told her no 6 months ago," he said. "Yes," I said, "you should have." "I'm sorry, Claire." I looked at him across the kitchen table where I had stood and listened to him call me a pushover, where I had set his phone down with such careful control, where I had drunk my glass of water and decided to stop being the version of myself that tolerated being managed. I looked at him and I thought about my grandmother on the back porch, knocking on the railing, saying, "Nobody can take a thing from you that's in your own name." And I thought, she meant more than just property. "I hear you," I said, "but sorry is the beginning of something, not the end of it." Brenda and Kayla stayed 2 nights at the Marriott Courtyard on 15th Street, on my money, as I had said they would, and drove back to Millbrook on Thursday morning. Brenda did not call me to say goodbye. She called Daniel 3 times that day and twice the next, and each time Daniel answered and kept the conversation short and didn't put me on. Whether that represented a permanent change or a temporary one, I didn't know yet, but it was something. Marcus Webb sent me a letter of advice regarding the house that I kept in a folder on my desk, alongside the deed and my grandmother's will and the photographs of every receipt. Not because I thought I would need it immediately, because knowing the full shape of what was mine, having it documented, clear, organized, felt like the way my grandmother had felt about paying cash. There was something in the having of it, the knowing, a kind of held breath, released. The marriage, our marriage, did not dissolve that autumn. I want to be honest about that, because the story of what happened between Daniel and me is not the clean narrative of a villain punished and a hero vindicated. It is more complicated and less satisfying than that, which is the way most true things are. We went to couples therapy beginning in November, a therapist named Dr. Anand, who had the quality of listening in a way that left no comfortable silences to hide in. We talked about what had happened. We talked about the architecture of how Daniel had been raised, the particular education of a man whose mother had made her need his protection the central organizing fact of his childhood, and how that had shaped him into someone who confused loyalty with compliance and love with the avoidance of conflict. We talked about what I had let happen, the warnings I had filed away, the signs I had called personality rather than pattern, the peacekeeping that had taught him, inadvertently, that I would absorb whatever was required of me. It was hard work. There were sessions I drove home from in silence, eyes dry and jaw tight, not sure if we were building something or dismantling it. There were evenings when I sat in the sage green room at my grandmother's desk and thought, maybe I should simply end this and be done with it. There were evenings when Daniel cooked dinner and we ate together and talked about something ordinary, a film, a neighbor, a project at my work, and I caught a glimpse of the person I had originally fallen in love with and thought, maybe there is a version of this that survives. I lost something that autumn, regardless of how things ultimately settled. I lost the specific, uncomplicated trust that I had brought into the marriage, the ease of it, the breezy certainty. That was gone. In its place was something more deliberate, more clear-eyed, less comfortable, and considerably more real. Whether that was a loss or an exchange, I was still deciding. There are things that did not change. The house on Cartwright Lane remained mine, solely, entirely, as documented and protected as anything my grandmother's careful hands had ever made secure. Brenda did not move to the city. Kayla eventually found work in a town 40 miles from Millbrook and moved there in February. Daniel and Brenda's relationship recalibrated, slowly and painfully, into something with actual edges. He visited her, he called her, but he no longer bent himself into shapes at her request. And me. I still have the basil on the kitchen windowsill, I still have the herb garden along the south fence, and the hardwood floors I refinished, and the sage green room at the top of the stairs that smells of old books and night-blooming jasmine in summer. I still have the photograph of my grandmother's garden on the hallway wall, next to the coat hooks, next to the door with its good, solid, brand-new lock. Some evenings I sit on the back porch, her porch, and mine, with a cup of chamomile tea going cool in my hands, and I look at the roses that she planted 40 years ago, still climbing their way up the fence, still riotous and various and completely themselves. And I think about what she told me. Nobody can take a thing from you that's in your own name. She meant a house. She meant a deed. She meant the thing that cash money, earned honestly, secures when you're a nurse working doubles in 1971. But she also meant something harder to document and easier to lose: the knowledge of who you are, the clarity of what you will and will not accept, the name that belongs to you and to no one else. I know what's mine. I know what's mine, and I know what I'll do to protect it. That's enough. For now, that's more than enough.